First Christian Church is a Disciples of Christ church, as most of you know. It was one of the three churches that was founded in Wadsworth when the settlement was first created. The Connecticut Western Reserve was this area of Ohio that had been put aside for those people in Connecticut who had been bombed out or their homes had been lost or whatever in the Revolutionary War. And out of the Northwest Territory, they took this parcel here and said that was, they gave that to these citizens of Connecticut, saying that you own the land, you have ownership of parts of that land there. And when we started settling then, what happens is the people in Connecticut sell the land that is available in this area, and they use that money to restore their houses in Connecticut. As a consequence, most of the people who came to this area were from Connecticut or from New England in one way or another. Below that line, it was mostly settled by people from Baltimore, and they were Catholics. And so one of the things that happens, for example, is Doylestown is settled by Catholics in 1835, and there are no Catholics in Wadsworth, and so when the Irish Catholic Railroad people come through, they have to live in Doylestown because there's no church in Wadsworth for them. And that kind of thing was very common. The biggest person who owned most of this land was a fellow named Elijah Wadsworth, and he was a general, and he had bought up a lot of this whole area which is about what Wadsworth Township is. And it was Elijah Wadsworth who was selling the land, and then he never came to this area at all. He never came to Wadsworth. He was just selling it to people from Connecticut who would buy the land and would then start to try to settle it. What do I use for a speaker? Which one?
They all work differently. Is that,
no, that's not. That's not the one.
No, in reverse. I thought that was General Wadsworth.
No. The surveyors came in 1808 to survey the land to show where the Northwest Territory was, or Connecticut Territory was. And so they established that line that is at the bottom line of Wadsworth Township. And so that went on from there. Is that what I can do? Just press this?
Well, I can do it. I don't
Okay.
want to throw off your routine.
The traveling to this area was very difficult, as you can imagine. There was only one road that had been cut through this entire Northwest Territory from about Akron and Talmadge, actually, all the way to what is now Lodi. It was cut by a fellow named Harris, and it was called Harris. The town was called Harrisville, and it was called Harris Pike. And the people who tried to go through that were very difficult, particularly because there was a place out here called River Styx, and it got its name because it was like River Styx. The whole area from when you get up to the top of the hill there and you turn right to go to the hospital, you go downhill and then you go back up to Acme Hill, that was all flooded. And in fact, that whole area was flooded. And it was known as, they called it the River Styx because that's what it seemed like. And the only way to get through that was another one. Well, the first person here was a fellow named Holmes. And we now have a river called Holmes Brook, and it was because he was out here, and for some reason historians don't want to accept him as the original settler of Wadsworth because he was married, I guess, to an Indian woman, And he essentially was traded with the Indians. He was not involved in the kind of things that the other people weren't. So even though Holmes was here, when the next one, when the people started coming out from New England and heading this way, hit the next one there. They had a difficult time, particularly getting across River Styx, because you had to have something called a corduroy road there. You had to float logs on the road until you got enough logs buried into the mud, and you could then drive a wagon over it. Next. You can't see that very well. It's somebody who's clearing the woods. Go ahead, next one. This is Elijah Wadsworth. Yeah, there are no pictures of Elijah Wadsworth for some reason. And so this is his tombstone. I've gone over to Camden where he was and visited that cemetery, and it's rather interesting, but there's just no pictures of him anywhere. He had bought the land, as I said, and he was selling it to these people. He would sell it in 400-acre lots, and the idea was that these people would come in and clear that 400 acres, get it producing as agriculture, and then once it was produced as agriculture, they were making a lot of money off of it. They would sell the property to somebody else who was moving in, and they would move on to the west. And so they went on to Iowa and all kinds of other places. So they were entrepreneurs, even though they were clearing the land. Nice. Yep. The first people who came had, you would come in the winter because you can imagine the whole place is forested. And that's why they wanted to come here. They thought it was very fertile land because there were so many trees growing here. And of course the trees had fallen over the years and a lot of rotted stuff in the ground, so it was fertile. And so it was going to be very good. But Holmes was one of the people who helped the first people build their log cabins. They didn't have any nails, and so you can see they're slotting this stuff here to make it all fit together without nails. And when they got to the roof, it was the same kind of thing. And when they got to building a fireplace, they didn't have any stone, so they built stick fireplaces. I don't know how those worked, but next. But you can see what it looked like, and the place would be completely covered with woods. And they would come here in the winter because that was the only way they could see the sun and see the stars and be able to navigate their way to where they were going. And so it's the worst time of the year to go traveling through that kind of muck out there, but that was the only thing they could do to get here. Next. The inside you can see is this is a typical inside of a log cabin. Next. And you can't see that very well either. But there you go. There you go. They would have church services in their log cabins. And next. And they would have schoolhouses like this as well. Next. There were two schoolhouses in Wadsworth, and this is Broad Street, and this is Hartman Road. And when I grew up here, it was called Gypsy Lane because the gypsies used to live out here during the 30s. And on the other end, you end up at Akron Road, and the first schoolhouse was here, a log cabin, and the second schoolhouse was at the other end of Hartman Road, on Akron Road, what we call now. And those were the two schoolhouses. The first church services started in the schoolhouse on the south side. Next. They had no ministers, and so they were served by what do we call them? Itinerant ministers circuit riders who would move from town to town, and most of the circuit riders would go an enormous distance, like 60, 80 miles, 100 miles, and they just kept moving, and whenever you got a minister, that was great. You had a church service with a minister. When you didn't have a minister, you just prayed and you read out of a book, a sermon or something like that. You sang songs. There were no musical instruments, and so you would do hymn singing, a cappella, I guess you call it. Next. Then later, they started to have larger camp meetings, and in 1833, Wadsworth was selected to be one of the camp meetings, and there were 3 denominations meeting at that time, alternately back and forth between the schoolhouses. The first one was a Methodist organization, the second was a Baptist, and the third was a Congregationalist. The Congregationalists and the Baptists were influenced by Alexander Campbell, and but not really. I mean, they were for separating themselves from their own congregations in one way or another. But they had been people who had come out of England or New England and had come to the Ohio and were trying to maintain their religion. What's amazing to me is that after they got here, it was within a year or two that they started having church services in their homes, and that they were very, very conscious about having carrying their religion with them into the wilderness. Next. Yeah, you can't see that guy either. They would have services in barns. And in 1833, Wadsworth was selected. There were 3 congregations meeting together without identifying themselves as congregations. And they were chosen to be the meeting place for the entire Western Reserve area. And so people came from hundreds of miles away and stayed overnight and all that for a week of this kind of congregational meeting. They had this in Isles Barn. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's E-Y-L-E-S. Ailes or L's? What do you think? Isles.
Isles.
Yeah. And he had a barn right where Hartman Road and Akron Road come together. And it was large enough that they could hold the congregation. And this is a meeting in a barn like that. Next. Let's see what we have here. And then they would also have camp meetings where the people would camp out, and they would come from miles around again in order to come together as different congregations and have religious services. And the biggest problem was finding a minister. That they were all just pioneers out there just toughing it out, trying to settle in, and there were not ministers around. So a typical service was somebody would read out of a Bible, read some service, and then they would sing some hymns with no instruments, and then they would do some praying. And for the disciples, as the Baptists, they started to have communion at every service. The first Christian church well, that's not it for some reason. But go ahead and hit another one.
You sure?
Well, yeah, let's do this here. These are 2 doors here. That's what I'm confused about. And the first church that first Christian created was in, I think, about 1828. And they wanted to, well, no, I'm sorry, this is 1842, I think it is, right? Yeah. And it was a church, this is not the church, this is a church that was on the diagonal road between Wadsworth and Medina, Route 57, and it was a Mennonite church at that time, but it was very typical of that kind of church. You have 2 doors because the men and women are supposed to go in separate doors, but the pulpit is right behind, right here in the front of the church. And so you can't come into church late. And you can't sneak out early either. And the church that they built where the First Christian is right now, they bought a half an acre of land from, who was it? Let me see.
The Alamos?
Pardee, I think it was. Yeah, Dr. George Pardee. They bought a half an acre of land. They built a church, and it would have been exactly like this. The pulpit would have been right behind here, and the church would slope up toward the back. And they said they had a wooden floor, but I'm not sure about that. Some of the churches had dirt floors at that time. But that was the beginning of the church at First Christian and on the corner of Boyer and High Street. Next. This is, who is this guy? Garfield?
Looks like him.
Yeah. Okay. James Garfield was connected to the Eclectic Institute, which became Hiram University, which is a First Christian Disciples institution. He taught there, but he also was an itinerant minister, and he would go from town to town. He preached at Wadsworth First Christian Church many times. During the war, he also got out there and stood on the front porch and recruited soldiers for the Civil War. He later became President of the United States, of course. Next.
You
Yeah.
push this side.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. It got moved. It's sensitive. Enlarge some of these anyways.
This is the Eclectic Institute at Hiram, which became Hiram College later on. And this is where Garfield also was teaching at that time as well. Okay, next. And this is later the Hiram University there. Next.
Alexander Campbell.
Okay, so this is Alexander Campbell. Let me see if I can catch up in my notes here. We're right at the time of the beginning of the Civil War. The Civil War is coming on. Alexander Campbell believed that if it wasn't in the Bible, particularly if it wasn't in not the Bible, but the New Testament, they were to be disciples of Christ. You followed the New Testament, not the Old Testament. And if it wasn't, whatever it was you were trying to do was not somehow represented in the New Testament, you wouldn't do it. And slavery was represented in the New Testament. So Alexander Campbell believed that slavery was okay in that sense because it had been accepted in the New Testament. However, he personally was opposed to the slavery, and when the Civil War came, he was very disconnected about where he was going to go with that. And so he really didn't make a decision one way or another. Next person. It's about this time, 42, right? The church is redone. And they get rid of the two doors in the front. They put in some Gothic windows in the church, and they begin to they put a little porch out here so that when you drive your wagon up in the mud, you can get out of the wagon. Next. At this time, there was a lot of coal mining going on in Wadsworth, and there's there's a part here that I didn't really know how, if I wanted to get into it, but the coal miners, well, first of all, as I said, there were no, the Doylestown had been settled by Catholics, and so there was a Catholic church in Doylestown. And so when the Irish Catholics came through building the railroad, they moved to Doylestown. They didn't live in Wadsworth. And when the coal mines started, a similar kind of thing happened. They went to Doylestown to get the labor to bring them here and to work the coal mines. The farms in Ohio and in the Wadsworth area were doing extremely well, except without the railroad, they couldn't sell the product that they were getting. And so once the railroad was in, they could sell the products that they were creating. And at the same time, once the railroad came through, they knew there was coal there, and they could start digging in the coal mines and developing the coal mines as well. The problem, again, was one of labor. And we think of the Wadsworth Township at this time as being a place where everybody was entrepreneurs, and there were no laboring class to speak of. And so they would have to go outside of the community to get the labor. And they were having problems with the coal mines because they paid the coal miners by the amount of coal that they brought out of the mine every day. And so they weren't paid by the hour, they were paid by how much coal they could bring out of the mine. And so as a consequence, the coal miners started going on strike. And at this point, Aaron Pardee and several of the others in town formed a militia. And we look at the Second Amendment, and it says, I forget what does it say? What? The right to bear arms. We think of it as the right to bear arms. But it says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the success of the country, we need to bear arms. Well, at that time, there was no standing army, and so Pardee, who was a member of the First Christian Church, formed together with most of the entrepreneurs in town and created a militia. And they went off to Virginia and brought blacks back and to work in the mines. And they, again, because they didn't want those blacks to live in Wadsworth, because Wadsworth was very entrepreneurial at that time, they built a camp out near Doylestown, and the militia put a fence around it, and they made sure the blacks stayed in the camp. Well, eventually those people moved into Mill Street, as we know later on, but it was the way that the mines were continued. The mines ran out of coal in the 1870s and 1880s, and that put the church and the whole community into a lot of depression at that time. What do you got next? These were the railroads at that time. Not very fancy. Next. This is the church again in the 1860s, I guess it is. What do I have here? Next, on the next one there. And as it develops later on. Go ahead. And let me see where I am here. This is in the 1860s, the church, and it's been renovated. And one of the things that happened with First Christian Church is it just thrived. It was constantly increasing its membership and constantly increasing the size of the church. And you can see that there's a south wing kicked out there on the side of the church there. And you can see the size of the congregation at that time as well. Next. This is the interior of the church, and they finally got a baptismal area in the back of the church by the altar there. Up until that time, most of the baptisms were taking place in the countryside, in the creeks. This is a guy who showed up in, about 1955? Yeah. And his name is Reverend Philip Gould. If you grew up in Wadsworth as I did, he showed up at Wadsworth High School all the time. And in those days, when I was in high school, I graduated in 1955 out of this school over here. And you had a chapel once a month. And you remember this? Okay. What?
The Ministerial Association.
Yeah, okay. And I was president of the student body, and so I had to conduct these services, even though I was Catholic at that time. I was had to produce a Protestant service. That wasn't as bad as Arnie Goldstein, who the year before had to conduct the service and so on. But Philip Gould was just precious when he would come to the school. And he was involved in everything in the community, and particularly Lions Club and other things like that. So that, and he was involved with all the other ministers in the community, so that more than just a minister of our church, he was just a major force in the community. Next. Let's see. This is a groundbreaking in 1955 for an addition to the church. Do you see somebody there you know?
Oh, there, I know everybody.
Who?
I know most everybody.
You know almost everybody.
Dave Hogan right now.
Okay. And
Yeah.
who do you know?
Earl Horner.
Earl Horner was there, Kay
Er-
Bowman, and
Is that you, Joe?
No, that's not me.
that's,
Okay. Anyway, Gould was just, everybody in the community knew him, and they felt like he was their minister, even though he was only the minister for First Christian. Go ahead. This is the addition they're putting on at that time. It's called the South Wing, and it jutting out from the side of the church there. It's because the church is just growing, and we need more places for the congregations and the services. Next. This is the interior at that time. This is the education building that was built under Gould. It's a brick building. The other building was wood. This is a very New England kind of fancy two-story building, and the old church was just an old wooden building, and so they were apart. They were separated. They weren't tied together at that time. Guess who that guy is? This is about what, 1981?
yeah, 1981.
Okay. And this is the interior of the church at that time. And you can see that they've added carpeting, and they've really improved the woodwork and the pews and everything. And there is a baptismal behind the curtain, I think, there, right? And there's an altar up there. Okay, next. Anybody know this guy? Yeah. He was the choir and the church music leader, and he would just get up and everybody, okay, we're going to sing now, and here we go, and all that kind of stuff. And he was just very, very well liked by everybody in the community, in the church. And this is Jane Ross, who replaced him later. Next. And this is what Martha Everhard looked like in 1980. Martha came in as just a helper, right? What was your first
I
position?
was a youth leader, wasn't I?
Youth leader, and then she got a designation as a minister from the Disciples Church, right? And so she became the associate pastor, and I was the first associate pastor we had at First Christian Church.
And the first female pastor in Medina County.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. First female minister in Medina County. Okay. Under this combination of Jim and Martha and Jane Ross and lots of other people, suddenly the church just exploded with all kinds of different activities. And this is something called the Search for the Christ Child. And would anybody like to explain what that is?
Oh. Well, we just would go from place to place saying, have you seen the baby Jesus?
Okay.
And then they would say, no, but I heard if you went down there.
Okay. And
And then we just follow the star. So we'd follow the star.
Okay.
Until eventually we found the baby Jesus.
Okay. And that continues to this day. And it's just a very, very popular, very well-attended event every year. Okay. Let's see. This was called the 20s group, and it was the first time we had kids who were graduated from high school. They were in their 20s, and we now formed a group so that they could come together at church and socialize and do all the other things. Next. This is Brenda Mulch, and she in charge of elementary education. We started an elementary education. There are little kids there going on something kind of system. Next, we have a carol choir of young children. And so we have a director who does that as well. Next. And then we have the chancel choir. And so you can see there's a lot of activity going on in the church, and the church is expanding as a consequence. And we're going from, I think it's, I have the figure here, just a minute. Anyway, we're moving up from around 400 to 700 at this time in the number of people attending the church. Next. This one is called the Covenant Group, and I'm not quite sure what the Covenant Group is.
Well, they would get together to pray.
Oh, okay. They get together to pray. Okay. Next one is this the next one? Yeah, Golden Agers, people like me. and they have asked me to do this presentation to them next, a couple of months from now. So next, this is Jerry Lash. Can you recognize him? Yeah, he's the adult coordinator, education, adult service. June Hart is the high school coordinator in this one. Next, Melody Horn standing there as the preschool coordinator. Next, this is a parenting group, a group that gets together who are concerned about parenting and so forth. Next, this is Karen Leatherman, the youth director. This is the sanctuary interior in 1883. 1983, I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay. This is Leslie Critchfield, who replaces Martha as the associate pastor. The stained glass windows were created about when? Back of,
Imported from England.
yeah, were they? Okay. And they, throughout all the remodeling of the church, we saved the stained glass windows over and over again and made sure they were part of it. Finally, this is Donna Cronander, who became the organist in 2005. And Rod Livingston, the last person here, who had been the organist, became the assistant organist. Now, that's the lecture I have on that. I'm going to go to the second group of slides now.
Okay, talk about something while I'm looking for it.
Yes. Do you have any questions about what's going on here? I tried to not get involved with Alexander Campbell, and there's several problems that the disciples have with his teaching, and one of them was that he didn't believe in, he believed that if it wasn't in the New Testament, you didn't do it. And he couldn't find anything in the New Testament that said there were instruments in the service. And so he didn't believe in having organs in the church. But our church, almost immediately, in the 1860s, I think it was, had
Organ in Medina County.
first organ in Medina County. And so, and then when you think about what happens in the, around 2000, we add a second service, and it's nothing but music and instruments and playing and a lot of music in that way. These are famous disciples of church, of our church, people who were disciples that you may know about. The first one is James A. Garfield, and we know that he was a disciple, obviously. Next one was J. William Fulbright, who was a disciple, and we don't think about those kind of people as being in our congregation. The third one was a fellow named John Muir, who was a disciple and who had a hard time finding services out there in the woods when he was running around Yosemite like that. Another one is David Lloyd George, a British Prime Minister who was very popular at the time, and he was a disciple of Christ. Go to the next one. And this is James Clark McReynolds, who was a Supreme Court Justice from 1914 to 1941, and he was a disciple of Christ. This is Preston Taylor, who was a minister from 1848 to 1931 and was very well known as a disciple of Christ minister. Next is Lew Wallace. Who was a Civil War general. And then next.
Wrote Ben-Hur. He wrote Ben-Hur.
Oh, did he wrote Ben-Hur? Okay. This guy here is named Tom Selleck. He's an actor. This is another actor named John Stamos. And then this is Jim Jones, who's a rapper, whatever that is. Then this guy is Ben Hogan. He was a golf player. And do you play golf? Do disciples play golf? Is that allowed? Okay.
Yeah, but not very well.
Not very well. Okay, all right. Okay. Okay, next one is William Hoover in Canton, Ohio. And he made Hoover vacuum sweepers. And then this guy is somebody called Lyndon Baines Johnson. Anybody recognize him? Can you believe he was a disciple? Okay. And Colonel Sanders was a disciple of Christ. Okay, and then the next one is Ronald Reagan was raised as a...
For a while. He was for a while, and then he switched.
Okay, we won't say that. Okay. He and Nancy, though, were married in a disciple church in California. And then the last one is somebody I used to know very well, John Wooden, and that's why he did so well in basketball, is because of disciple of Christ. Okay, we have one last slide presentation if you want to go there. If I can get there. These are taken from the 1978 First Christian directory, yeah. And these are, this is Jean Bannister here in 1978. This is what she looks like today. Next one is Waco Barnhart, and this is, next. This is what,
Sunday school at our church for over 50 years.
really? Okay, I didn't know that. She looks like she did. Okay. Next one, Bruce and Jerry Becker. Next, and there they are. Next one is Kay Bowman. Is Kay here? No?
She's in the last row.
In the last row? Oh.
She left.
She left, okay. Next one is Rick, okay, and there's Kay.
That was her.
Okay, this is Ricky Boyer, right here. And he's very active in the church now. Next, there he is there. Okay, next one is Paul and Jean Brown. And this is what they look like today. Ed and Barb Calamay, is that right? Calum, okay. And that's what they look like today. Next one. We missed the earlier one, I guess. Mhm. This is Eugene Klinkenberg, and there he is there. He sits in the back of the church with me, and
That's him.
that's him.
All right.
Okay, next one. Oh, no, we missed one here somewhere.
Well, if I go back, he's the one behind.
Okay,
So we've been through these guys.
okay, stop there then.
All right.
Okay. This is
Cordis.
Cordis, yeah. How'd we get way down to him? Okay. And this is Cordis's today with Greg. Okay. Who do you think this is?
Ruth Darling.
There she is. Okay. Okay, for some reason we're out of order here.
It's the order you have them in.
Okay, go.
And Jan Dye was my secretary.
Okay, all right, okay. Where can I? Okay, Kenny Dye. Guess who this is? Would you recognize that person?
I sure would, boy, that's my sweet.
Okay, there it is, Martha and Richard. Okay, next. George and Winnie Foy. There they are. Next one is Phyllis Freeborn. And there's some history here that I don't know about her, but she is a long time member of the.
Minutes at 9 o'clock. Please be aware that the public computers will shut down 15 minutes before closing. At this time, please check out your material. Thank you for using the Wadsworth Public Library.
That's your 30-minute warning.
Okay, go. Phyllis is somebody I now am, as an elder, I'm visiting, and she's in really bad shape right now, but she is just a tremendously strong person, and she's been in the church for years and years and years, yeah, our whole life.
In the church.
Next one, Betty Gift. Yeah. Okay, next one. Ray and Betty Gill. Do you know these people? Look at those Gill. Okay. There they are. Next one is John and Brenda Grom. And do you know them? Look at these people. Next one, Esther Groover. When did she get her white hair? Are you here, Wester? Yeah. It goes in the family, right? Okay, all right. Okay, let's see, where we end up?
Mike, Joe,
Groover, okay.
we just call him Groove.
Okay, and this is Clayton Frida Kramer. There they are later. Next one, Martha Kreider. There she is today.
She sung in our choir for how long? How long has Martha sung in our choir? Martha, how long have you sung in our choir?
40 years.
Okay. Ray and Lana Landis. Yay, look at these guys. Okay, Jerry and Vivian Lash, I should say. There they are. Then Megan Lash is this little person over there on the left, and that's what she looks like today. Yeah. This is Karen Leatherman, and that, of course, is her husband there. And this is Keith and Karen Longfield.
Back that one up.
Cost extra.
This is Alan and Amy Mavity. Mavity.
Wow.
Okay. There they are. This is Donna Maxon back there. Is Donna here? Yeah, you're here somewhere. Yeah. There you are. This is Chris Messner. Next, Donna Mounts there. Brenda Much, okay. There she is. Nancy Knopfsinger. She must be, what, in her 90s?
No,
No, not really.
she's my age,
Sorry.
and I'm 34.
I know. Jack Ollum. Bob and Linda Parmalee. Are they here? Oh, there they are. Okay. Chuck and Judy Feaster, whatever. Feaster. This is Marianne Reynolds in the back there, and then she became Marianne Rothacre later. Next. This is Bob Rogers back there. Marianne Sisson, isn't that it? Okay. There she. This is Rhea Dott, Sprang. Is Rhea Dott here? No? Okay, there she is. Linda, Kevin, and Ken Straub are in this picture.
Uh-oh, my battery's low.
Uh-oh. There they are today. And then this group. Do you know these guys? Oh. This is Dick and Pauline Thompson.
Boy, he was hot stuff.
And this is John. Which one is John here? Is this? This is John here, but
Here we are.
this one right here? Okay. And the next one should be Mark. Okay. Which one is Mark? This one over here? Okay. And there's Mark on the right. No, Mark. Okay. And this is Terry and Carol Tucker. Doesn't she look great? There she is today. Finally, this is Ethel Warfel. And way back there somewhere is, I don't have her in my list here, but Jan Weber, yeah, way back there. There she is. And then John Woodward. And this is John today. And then finally, Alita Yentz on the left there. And there she is today. Okay. Okay. The only last...
Good timing.
Good timing, okay.
He just died.
Okay, it just died, so we're out of that. So are there any questions you would like to... Yes?
I don't remember him, but I've heard of Obadiah Newcomb in our church area, and I was wondering what you found out about him. Obadiah Newcomb?
Yeah, he started, he was one of the first ministers in the church, and he was one of the organizers of that when they were first began putting themselves together as disciples of Christ. I tried to find a picture of him, and I couldn't find a picture anywhere. So, yeah, his tombstone is out there. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Was Alexander Campbell out of Tennessee?
Alexander Campbell started in Pennsylvania, I believe it was. He founded a college in what was Virginia at that time, is now West Virginia, and he did a lot of moving around in Ohio, and particularly in the Northwest Territory, but I don't think he ever showed up at the church.
From Scotland?
Yeah, he came from Scotland originally, yeah, in 1808, yeah.
Educated there.
And
Did you meet somebody from Kentucky and they wanted to draw the Christians?
yes, yes,
So I'm remembering, okay.
okay.
I don't know when I learned that.
Okay.
I told it to you about,
Well, I want to, any other questions? I really thank you for showing up. This was very difficult for me to try to put together because it's very, very complicated, and I wanted to make it as simple as possible. Maybe I made it too simple. But the best thing is seeing the old faces and seeing the old church. And yeah, she says it's good. Okay. So thank you very much.